comes the story of the hurricane. The man the authorities came to blame for something that he never done. Put him in a prison cell but one time.
So are political assassinations now the norm in the United States of America, Stephen?
Well, they could certainly become the norm if we don't take action to reclaim our democracy from fascism, tyranny, and authoritarianism. Let me just say that working for President Trump during his first term in office was the greatest and most humbling experience of my life. And it was my privilege to implement his policies and his directives every single day and help put his vision, along with other very talented staff, into being. What you're seeing right now with this Biden White House is descent into tyranny. Here's a fact that many people may not realize, that my organization, America First Legal, uncovered. The Biden White House is the entity that authorized DOJ to seek the documents at Mar-a-Lago through what is known as a special access request. That special access request was unlawful. It is only allowed to be used to conduct the business of the presidency. So a simple example would be, if you want to know who was invited to the last state dinner with Japan, you can ask the National Archives, hey, can you get us the list of who was invited to the last state dinner from Japan? We really need that. I know they're in the previous president's files, but we need to know that so we don't leave anybody off this year's guest list. They used it. They made that request in order to justify and legitimize a criminal raid of Mar-a-Lago. So this goes straight to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So any notion, any suggestion that this is just an FBI op and the White House isn't involved is an absolute lie. It comes straight from Joe Biden's own lawyers in the White House counsel's office. So we are dealing with a president right now who is himself a fascist. That is true. And you see it not only with that outrageous lethal raid of Mar-a-Lago, but you see it with the censorship of speech, the jailing of political dissidents, the criminalizing of dissent. I mean, we know all the cases. A meme can get you put in jail today by Biden's Justice Department. We've seen the sentences handed down to pro-life activists that are longer jail terms than you get in this country for violent assault, longer jail terms than you get in this country for robbery and home invasion. And of course, Black Lives Matters rioters, the enforcement arm of the left, don't even go to jail. They don't even go to prison. What message is that? The message is, if you commit violence on behalf of the Biden administration and Joe Biden's policies, you're not even going to go to jail. All of this are the hallmarks of tyranny. And if you don't think it can happen here, it's happening here. It's happening here right now. Donald Trump is on trial, fighting for his freedom and his life and our freedom with it in 4 criminal cases, all of which you can tie directly back to Biden's DOJ. All of them, in every single case.
So it begs the question, because you were presumably at the White House at this time. We have this clip that we'd like to bring back up. You never see this played again. You just mentioned BLM. Here are BLM and Antifa far-left protesters attacking the building that you were working in at the time, fighting and or assaulting federal officers, assaulting Secret Service agents. The special forces had to be called in. We were just researching this morning. Special forces had to be called in to secure the White House. Donald Trump was taken down to a secure location. I'm not sure if you were or not, but I know for a fact that you were working at the White House during this assault on the building where the stated intended goal was to murder the President of the United States. They burned White House buildings to the ground. They torched a church. And the goal of the left here was to kill you. I'm sorry to put it in those terms, Stephen. I really like you. as a person, but that's what they said on camera. They weren't shy about it. And they harmed hundreds of Secret Service agents in the process. A single gate, actually, is what separated them from you. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, so I was indeed there at the time. I remember that well. I remember the entire period of BLM violence quite well, when it was just dangerous just to drive home from work. But you had BLM rioters and agitators roaming the streets, blocking traffic, menacing violence, breaking store windows. But specifically with respect to that incident, and I talked to many Secret Service agents afterwards. Agents were literally fighting hand-to-hand combat against those radicals to stop them from invading the White House, climbing that fence, and through sheer force of numbers, invading the White House. That is what happened. It is the actual definition of an insurrection. Where are the prosecutions? Where is the national narrative about the BLM insurrection outside the White House? Where are the discussions of how democracy barely survived that day? You don't see it. There'll be no discussion of it because the left instead wants to create a completely false and constructed narrative that normal, patriotic Americans are domestic terrorists and threats to the survival of democracy, when in fact, it is BLM, it is Antifa, it is the radical left Marxists that are and remain the threat to the survival of American democracy.
I want to move on to what the president said on Truth Social about this assassination attempt, but just really quickly here, considering that Donald Trump is doing really, really well right now in the polls, and everything that they're throwing at him seems to just increase his chances of becoming our next president. Since we're on the subject, and since you brought it up, would you advise the president, hypothetically in term 2, to potentially go after some of those protesters for insurrection? Would you advise? Because you're a parent, I'm a parent of young children. There must be consequences, otherwise the bad behavior will continue. And this seems like the point. The point was there was never any consequence for leftist bad behavior, for leftist violence. Leftist violence is met with rewards and met with rewarding behavior. None of those people were charged. As far as I know, not a single one of those insurrectionists that tried to take your life and the life of the president was charged.
Yeah, ultimately, I don't know the disposition of all those cases, but I think it's a safe bet that it was all swept under the rug by DOJ. And to my earlier point, and then I'll answer your question. They've built this narrative about how democracy barely survived on January 6th, that we were moments away from the end of American democracy, to justify, right? They spread that lie to justify all of the repression and crackdown on political dissent in America over these last 3.5 years. And my point is that when you have an actual case, far from even having that kind of histrionic rhetoric, when you have an actual case of a significant violent threat emanating from the radical left, it's just all memory hold. It's just all memory hold. But to answer your question, I think President Trump has been clear in stating that he would direct the Department of Justice to pursue any radical organization in this country that spreads and foments violence, that spreads and foments social unrest, that uses terror and the threat of bodily harm to impose its agenda, and that he would undertake radical reform of law enforcement in this country to get back to the business of going after bad guys, not going after mom and pop stores, not going after pro-life activists, not going after memers, not going after people engaged in legitimate self-defense, not going after conservative organizations and activists, but going after actual villains in this country who hurt, who maim, who harm, who lie, who cheat, who steal, which is what law enforcement is supposed to be doing, not a political arm, not a partisan arm of Joe Biden's administration to crush political dissent.
Yes. So you talk about crushing political dissent. I mean, you can't get more crushing than sending a bunch of disguised, armed federal agents with a order to kill into Mar-a-Lago, into Melania Trump and Barron Trump's bedroom, along with Donald Trump's office. Donald Trump saying, authorize the FBI to use deadly lethal force. Now we know for sure that Joe Biden is a serious threat to democracy. He's mentally unfit to hold office. 25th Amendment. Your old boss here effectively saying that there was an assassination. There's an assassination order. If Donald Trump Donald Trump was at Mar-a-Lago at that time, then federal agents were authorized to kill.
It's impossible to underscore how mad this all is. In other words, how mad DOJ's order is, how mad Garland's order is, how mad the White House's involvement is, and what a threat, as Donald Trump says it is, to American democracy. This was a paperwork dispute. A paperwork dispute. A president has the absolute right to take with him whatever paper he wants when he leaves the White House. As a legal matter, as a constitutional matter. We've written extensively about this in America First Legal. We've released a white paper on it. I don't have time to get into it all now. Just take my word for it when I say to you, constitutionally, the commander-in-chief can decide when he leaves office what are his personal records or not, full stop. But if the National Archives wants to complain about that and wants to say, oh, this is our record, this is not your record, this is your record, this is our record, they want to complain about it. That is a boring, dull, purely administrative process where people meet and they discuss and they compare notes and they have conversations. That is all it is. That is all it ever could be. It could never legitimately ever be a criminal dispute. Ever. Could never be. The Biden White House and the Biden DOJ not only criminalizes a paperwork disagreement, but to the point of this conversation, authorizes the use of deadly force in the context of settling that paperwork dispute. This is unheard of. And I don't want to hear any BS about how, well, the FBI all the time in conducting various raids has a section of their deadly force. Yeah, if you're going into the house of the Sinaloa cartel and you have 50 gangbangers all armed to the teeth, probably some even have grenades, and they're going to basically shoot anybody who walks through the door, and these are the most merciless mercenaries in the whole world, yeah, it would make sense that there would be a section on using lethal force. You're going to collect a manila envelope from Mar-a-Lago, and you're going to have a section in there on deadly force? Are you out of your mother-loving minds? Don't try to normalize this. Don't try to legitimize it, right? Don't gaslight us. This isn't normal. This isn't okay. This isn't right or left either. This isn't right or left. I don't care if you're right, left, or center. We need to get back to having freedom in this country again, to having liberty in this country again, to having democracy in this country again. We don't want spy agencies running our lives. We don't want censors running our lives. We don't want to have DOJ bureaucrats running our lives. We want a government that goes after bad guys and leaves the good guys alone to live their lives and raise their families. This isn't right or left. This is about having a normal, free, healthy society, or basically having the mindset of these radical left crazies that you see on our college campuses, that you see in the White House, that you see in DOJ, trying to make all of us live under their thumb. And nobody wants that. Nobody who is honest and ethical should want that or would want that.
It's such an important point to couch this in religious terms. It's a cult. It's a cult that worships violence and power, and they're okay with violence as long as it gets them power. The ends do justify the means, and that's been proven again and again. And if you are committing violence on their behalf, whether you're the FBI or whether you're a BLM Antifa college dropout, then it doesn't matter. You get rewarded actually for that. And that system needs to end because it's going to end in civil war or worse. You can't run a society like that. I suppose, so now identifying the problem, let's identify the solution. Again, I can talk you up. You don't need to talk you up. You're just such a brilliant mind inside of the Trump administration, term one. Prayers up that you will be serving in Trump administration term two.
You're very kind.
Stephen, how do you get rid of this? How do you carve this cancer and this rot out of the very core of the federal government where it seems it has taken root?
Well, the short answer to that question is the good guys need to be as tough as the bad guys. That's the simplest way I could put it. If you want to have a country that is safe and serene and stable, where the blocks that our children play on are filled with happy families, not drug dealers and gang members and MS-13 killers, where people learn to love America in their schools, not hate it and hate each other, where law enforcement uses all of its considerable power to try to arrest cartels and robbers and murderers and not pro-life activists and peaceful Americans. If you want to be able to say what you think online and question government authority and express your own views and question the medical establishment and just live a free, happy life, then you're going to have people represent you who are dogged and determined in going after the forces tearing this country apart. But unlike them, we will use legitimate means to do so. We will never, ever, ever be like the other side who, like BLM and Antifa, who resort to the lowest levels of violence, who debase themselves and who debase their families and their country with their conduct. We are going to pursue peace and harmony and stability through lawful and legitimate means. And that begins with everybody watching today getting involved in the civic processes of your community and your city and your society at every level to say, I want a future for my children that is peaceful and just. I will not let this country descend into sectarianism and balkanization and all the kinds of horrors that you mentioned, Benny, where everybody is fighting everybody. We need to be a country again in which people settle their disputes through proper debate, through freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, not through the raw power of the state and not through the raw violence of the left shock troops.
Yes, I mean, we're descending into a zero trust society. It didn't used to be this way. I was born in the 80s. We used to have a very high trust society. And I've seen that you don't want to live in a zero trust society. Zero trust societies are collapsed societies. Where you don't recognize or even speak the same language as the person on the street next to you. That's a bad society. You don't want to raise children there. And so,
high trust societies, there's more to life than just your job. That's an important part of your life. It's not your whole life or anything close to it. You want to live in a place where people feel secure and happy. They can trust each other. Your neighbors are your friends. The storekeeper is someone that you would trust to. You could hand them your wallet and come back in 30 minutes and they would still be there, right? Where if you see somebody in line at the store and you say, hey, can you hold my spot for me? I have to go outside and put money in the meter. They hold your spot for you. All these little things, right? But they add up at every level of society to make it a happy and wonderful place to live. But if you let, as the left does, right, if you let somebody come in and just ransack a store, if you let somebody just slash your tires and get away with it, if you let somebody try to burn down a police station and get away with it, then you become a low-trust society where you have to have eagle eyes. You have to be looking every direction, everywhere you go. Is this place safe? Is this place secure? Nobody wants to live that way. But that's what happens when you invite anarchy. And that's the left's current agenda, anarchy. And again, nobody who is sane, who is thoughtful, who is well-adjusted, wants to live in a society where you have anarchy at the bottom and you have repression at the top.
Yes. So much of that is obviously not knowing who is in our society, not knowing where they came from or who they are. Obviously, thousands of people, as we've covered on this program many times, on the terrorist watch list have poured into the nation and are doing so at numbers that we've never seen before. These are people on the terrorist watch list. These are people from special countries of interest happening every single day by the tens of thousands. So how do we fix it? You were the architect of Donald Trump's border policies in term one. How do you hit the ground running?
Well, I mean, President Trump has stated very clearly, very repeatedly, very emphatically that we need to have a massive, large-scale deportation and removal effort. And clearly that's true. There's some areas in life where there are a lot of nuance. We can debate, for example, the finer points of architecture. There are areas in life where there is not nuance, where things are very simple and very clear. And in fact, you have to avoid the trap of falling into never-ending nuance. This is very clear. Joe Biden has brought, depending on how you look at it, something like 15 million uninvited illegal foreign nationals into this country. They weren't here as recently as 2020. They weren't here. Now they are. Simple choice. Do they stay or do they go? That's it. The answer has to be, can only be, they go. Because if they don't, then you are submitting as a civilization to lawlessness. You cannot have migration without consent. That is a fundamental principle of having a civilization. The people who live here decide who enters. And if you enter without the consent of the populace that is living here, you have to go home. Because if you violate that fundamental aspect of the social contract, then what is the basis upon which the government asks everybody else to work hard, follow the rules, follow the laws, pay your taxes, follow the regulations? So that what? So that other people can break into your country and take everything you work so hard for? Makes no sense, because it's unjust, it's immoral, it's theft. It is theft, it is robbery. You are robbing from the American people. So the only solution is to, yes, humanely, yes, responsibly, to remove all of the people that Joe Biden has, through his invasion, brought into our country.
So many have come on this program, Stephen, and said that Joe Biden is the world's largest human trafficker. Ted Cruz was one of them. But
True.
The largest human trafficker in world history is Joe Biden. And that there are penalties for human trafficking. And that there may be some very heavy penalties for many of the things that Joe Biden's done. Presumably, we don't know even the half of it. You have enumerated on this program a number of crimes, seemingly, just in this short interview. So given President Trump's holding of you in very high stature as an advisor, what would be your advice to sort of close the door, and this final question here, but sort of close the door on the Biden regime and the horrors that they have wrought to this country? Presumably, again, as a parent, and congratulations on your beautiful family. Presumably, you would take the same tact that I do as a parent of young children, and there must be consequences to prevent this behavior again. The people responsible must face a spanking, a consequence, in order to stop the behavior. If allowed to just peacefully go off into the sunset and write books, then they're going to do it again. So just finally here, your thoughts on an incoming Trump administration, the Department of Justice. How do they administer justice, and what to do next?
Well, so two things. One, there's an enormous continuum of criminal conduct at every level of the human trafficking and smuggling across the border. I mean, all the way down to NGOs that are facilitating and involved directly in human trafficking, up through the very large criminal syndicates that operate throughout this country that organize the human smuggling and trafficking, everywhere in between. With respect to Biden, what I would say is that there's a very interesting irony here. Biden is fighting very, very hard in order to eliminate immunity for office holders. In other words, the idea that a president, the sacrosanct constitutional principle that a president is immune for the official conduct of his duties. So this is where the irony comes in. If the Supreme Court does not uphold presidential immunity, then axiomatically Joe Biden is criminally liable for every single action that he took with respect to our wide open border and human smuggling and trafficking. And so the question is, is the left, and the answer, of course, is yes, so desperate to stop Trump that they would eliminate presidential immunity for Joe Biden? That is obviously the calculation they seem to be making. But that Supreme Court ruling will answer that question as to what criminal jeopardy attaches to Joe Biden. But either way, there needs to be accountability across the board for the sponsorship and the engineering of this criminal invasion of our country.
So we will prayers up for the next Attorney General. Better be got to be a strong one, and the next Trump administration, which, judging by every available piece of data, Trump is running such a sharp campaign. I think there's such wisdom that has been learned in term one, and mistakes that were made and have been corrected. There seems to be it seems like the rigging is very tight heading into the next 5 months in the election.
Well, all I can say about that is that Donald Trump presided over 4 years of peace, stability, prosperity, security, a secure border, secure communities, and a secure nation in a world that was riven before him by war and now is again. And we've seen under Joe Biden a border invasion, a descent into anarchy in our cities, tyranny at the top, and a world on fire. And that is the reality that we are living with every single day. In fact, we've never, ever been closer to World War III than we are right now.
Yes. Yes. So we can change it. If you don't like it, you can change it. Something I tell my kids all the time. Yeah. You can have Kim Jong-un clapping Donald Trump on the shoulder in the back, welcoming him into North Korea, which I view as the zenith of the Trump administration. I view that as the very peak. It's peace instead of war. And it's security. Yeah, security instead of the horrors.
The real courage is the courage to find peace, not to make war.
Yes. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Godspeed, Stephen. Please, everybody follow Stephen Miller. Of course, you know Stephen Miller, but you got to follow him. Look at him on his way to 1 million. On his way to 1 million on X. 630,000 people. Can't be wrong. The man on a mission. Follow Stephen and support his incredible group, America First Legal. One of the best groups in America right now.
Thank you so much.